Today, we are tackling a book that has been described not just as a bestseller, but as a phenomenon. A book that has pulled millions of people out of the depths of anxiety, depression, and existential despair, and placed them firmly, sometimes for the first time in their lives, into a state of peace. This is The Power of Now, a guide to spiritual enlightenment by Eckhart Tolle. Now, before we go any further, I want to set the stage. This isn't just a self-help book about stress management. It doesn't offer you a 10-step plan to organize your calendar so you can worry less. No. The Power of Now makes a radical, almost unsettling claim: your mind is not your friend. In fact, the voice in your head, the one that comments, judges, worries, and plans, is the primary source of all human suffering. And the solution? It isn't a better job, a better relationship, or a better past. It is something far simpler and far more difficult: to step out of time altogether. Stay with me. Over the next few hours, we are going to break down exactly what it means to live in the now, why the present moment is the only thing you will ever truly have, and how accessing this state can dissolve fear, pain, and the ego itself. Whether you are a spiritual seeker, a skeptic who is simply tired of being anxious, or someone going through a difficult transition, this summary is designed to guide you through the core teachings of Eckhart Tolle, teachings that have changed the landscape of modern spirituality. Let's begin. Part 1. About the book and the author. To understand the weight of The Power of Now, we have to understand the man who wrote it. Eckhart Tolle was not born a guru. He didn't spend decades in an ashram studying ancient texts before emerging to teach. His path to enlightenment was born out of sheer, unadulterated suffering. Before he became the spiritual teacher known to millions, Eckhart Tolle was a man in his late 20s living in London. By his own account, he suffered from severe depression, anxiety, and a pervasive sense of dread. He describes it as a state of suicidal despair. He would wake up in the middle of the night and look at the ceiling, feeling an immense hatred for his own existence. The voice in his head, the I that was narrating his misery, was relentless. One night, it came to a head. He was so consumed by the thought, "I cannot live with myself any longer," that he realized a profound paradox. He says, "I observed that the thought I cannot live with myself implied that there were two, I and myself. Only one of them could be real." In that moment of absolute surrender, the mind stopped. The voice vanished. He fell into a void of silence. When he woke up the next morning, the world was transformed. The birds singing, the sunlight through the curtains, everything was alive, vibrant, and suffused with peace. He had dissolved the ego. This wasn't a moment of intellectual understanding, it was a radical shift in consciousness. For the next 2 years, he spent most of his time sitting on park benches in London, watching the world go by in a state of deep bliss. Eventually, people began to approach him, asking, "What happened to you? I want what you have." And so, the teaching began. The Power of Now was published in 1997. Initially, it spread by word of mouth. Without major advertising, it became a word-of-mouth phenomenon, eventually landing on the New York Times bestseller list and being translated into over 30 languages. Oprah Winfrey later named it one of her favorite books, catapulting Tolle into the global spotlight. What makes Tolle unique, and what makes this book so accessible, is that he bridges the gap between Eastern mysticism and Western psychology. He uses the language of modern consciousness to explain ancient truths found in Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, and Christian mysticism. He doesn't ask you to believe in anything. He asks you to test his hypothesis through direct experience. Can you be present? Can you watch your mind? If you can, you will discover the truth for yourself. Chapter by chapter summary. Chapter 1. You are not your mind. The book opens with one of the most arresting statements in modern literature. The greatest obstacle to enlightenment is the inability to free yourself from your mind. Tolle begins by asking you to listen to the voice in your head. You know the one, the constant commentary. "I need to buy milk. Why did she say that? I hope I didn't mess up that presentation. I'm not good enough. I wonder what they think of me. Most people assume that this voice is who they are. Tolle says this is the fundamental error. He introduces the concept of the watcher. He instructs you to not judge the voice, but simply to observe it. As soon as you observe the voice, you realize that you are not the voice. You are the awareness behind it. This shift, from thinking to awareness, is the first step. The madness of the mind. Tolle uses a powerful analogy. He says that if a voice in your head was constantly commenting on your life, making predictions, and criticizing you, you would consider that person insane. Yet, when we do it internally, we call it normal. In fact, this constant mental noise is a form of madness. It is a compulsion. He distinguishes between thinking and consciousness. Thinking is a tool. It is useful for solving problems, building bridges, and organizing your life. But when thinking becomes compulsive, when you cannot stop it, it becomes a dysfunctional addiction. The problem is that the tool begins to use the user. Your mind starts running your life, and your life becomes a slave to the past and future. Ending the illusion of time. Tolle introduces a radical idea. Time isn't real. The past only exists as a memory trace in your mind. The future only exists as a projection or anticipation in your mind. The only thing that ever truly exists is the present moment. He says, the past gives you an identity, and the future holds the promise of salvation, of fulfillment, in whatever form. Both are illusions. He doesn't suggest you forget your past or stop planning for the future. He suggests you don't live there. You use time when necessary, but you don't let time use you. Most people live in a state of psychological time, constantly using the past to explain the present, and the present to prepare for a future that never arrives. Practical exercise. Tolle gives us our first practice. He says, next time you find yourself trapped in a narrative about the past or anxiety about the future, ask yourself, what is my problem right now? Not in an hour, not tomorrow, right now. You will likely find that at this very moment there is no problem. There is only the present situation, which you can handle. The problem is a construct of the mind. Consciousness, the way out of pain. In this chapter, Tolle deepens the practice of self-observation. He introduces the concept of surrender, not as defeat, but as the cessation of inner resistance. The unhappy self. He argues that most humans carry a heavy burden of accumulated emotional pain. This pain manifests as resentment, anger, hatred, or self-pity. This pain, when it accumulates, forms what he calls the pain body. The pain body. This is a central concept. Imagine that every negative emotional experience you've ever had, every insult, every betrayal, every moment of grief, doesn't just disappear. It leaves a residue. These residues coalesce into a field of energy that lives inside you. The pain body has two modes, dormant and active. When something in your life triggers it, often a minor event that mirrors an old wound, the pain body awakens. It literally feeds on more pain. It wants to create drama. It wants to argue. It wants to be right. It wants to make you miserable so it can survive. Have you ever had a minor disagreement that suddenly escalated into a screaming match about everything wrong in your life for the past 10 years? That is the pain body taking over. Identifying the pain body. The key to liberation is to become aware of the pain body when it arises. Tolle says you must watch it. Recognize it. Ah, there is the pain body. Do not analyze it. Do not judge it. Simply observe it as a field of energy. When you bring awareness to the pain body, you stop feeding it. It cannot survive in the light of your consciousness. Over time, the pain body weakens and eventually dissolves. This is a form of emotional alchemy, turning suffering into consciousness. Why we hold on to pain. Tolle makes a startling observation. He notes that often we don't want to let go of our pain because our pain forms a core part of our identity. I am the one who was wronged. I am the victim. If you let go of the pain, who are you? The ego would rather be miserable and have a solid identity than be peaceful and have no identity. Recognizing this attachment to suffering is crucial. Chapter 3. Moving deeply into the now. This chapter is the practical heart of the book. Tolle moves from theory to direct instruction. He asks, how do you stop dwelling in time? How do you anchor yourself in the now? The two types of time. He distinguishes between clock time and psychological time. Clock time is necessary for practical matters, appointments, learning from the past, planning the future. Psychological time is when you forget that you are using time and start living in it. You dwell on past mistakes, or you use the present solely as a stepping stone to a future that you imagine will be better. He says the key is to use clock time, but eliminate psychological time. Learn from the past, but don't carry its emotional weight. Plan for the future, but don't project anxiety onto it. When you are planning, be fully present in the act of planning. The end of waiting. Tolle identifies waiting as a core mental state of the ego. We are always waiting for something: the weekend, vacation, a promotion, retirement, the right partner. He says, waiting is a state of mind. Basically, it means that you want the future, you don't want the present. You don't want what you've got, and you want what you haven't got. He challenges you to drop waiting. If you are in a doctor's waiting room, don't wait. Be there. Feel the chair, breathe, observe the room. The moment you stop waiting, you reclaim power. The gateway to the now. Tolle gives us a simple, yet profound, practice. Focus your attention on the inner energy field of your body. Close your eyes and feel your hands. Is there life in them? Feel your feet. Feel the aliveness within. He calls this the inner body. By shifting your attention from thought to the sensation of aliveness within, you immediately anchor yourself in the now. This practice serves two purposes. First, it pulls your attention out of the mind. Second, it strengthens the watcher presence. The more you inhabit your body, the less susceptible you are to the ego and the pain body. Chapter 4. Mind strategies for avoiding the now. If the now is the key to peace, why do we avoid it? Tolle argues that the ego finds the present moment threatening because it has no substance in the now. The compulsion to escape. He lists the ways we avoid the now: excessive television, compulsive shopping, substance abuse, constant talking, daydreaming about the future, or dwelling on the past. If you look closely at your life, you will notice that you are always trying to get somewhere else. He introduces the concept of the waiting mind. This is the mind that says, I'll be happy when, or if only this would happen. He says this is a fundamental dysfunction. If you place your happiness in a future condition, you are setting yourself up for perpetual disappointment. Even if the condition is met, you will immediately create a new condition to wait for. Dissolving resistance. Tolle teaches that resistance to the present moment is the root of suffering. If you are in a situation you don't like, you have three choices: remove yourself from it, change it, or accept it totally. Any other option, complaining, mentally arguing, wishing it were different, is suffering. It's the ego's way of saying, I refuse to be here. He emphasizes that acceptance is not passivity. If you accept a situation fully, you are often empowered to change it more effectively because you are acting from a place of peace rather than resistance. Chapter 5. The State of Presence. This chapter elevates the discussion from being present to being presence itself. What is presence? Presence is not something you do. It is what you are when you cease to identify with the mind. It is the felt sense of your own being. Tolle describes it as the eternal I am. It is the silent observer behind all thought. He uses the metaphor of the sun and the moon. The ego is like the moon. It has no light of its own. It only reflects the light of the sun. But when the sun is obscured by clouds, the moon thinks it is the source. Presence is the sunlight breaking through. The relationship between presence and time. Tolle explains that you cannot have the present moment. You are the present moment. The now is the space in which your life unfolds. If you can rest in the awareness of the now, you will find that the mind becomes still. This stillness is not an empty void. It is a field of vibrant creative energy. He addresses a common question. If I live in the now, how do I function in the world? He answers by explaining that the most effective action comes from a state of presence. When you are present, your actions are aligned with the flow of life. You are not reacting from past conditioning. You are responding to the situation with clarity. Chapter 6. The Inner Body. Tolle expands on the practice of focusing on the inner body. He argues that the physical body is a gateway to the formless, eternal dimension of your being. The body as a portal, most people are identified with their physical appearance or their mind. But there is a deeper dimension, the feeling of aliveness within the body. Tolle says that if you close your eyes and try to feel your hand, you don't feel the physical hand, you feel a subtle vibration, a field of energy. That is your life force. It is the same life force that animates the entire universe. By anchoring your attention in this energy field, you ground yourself in the now. You become less reactive to external events because you have discovered an inner source of stability, healing the physical body. Tolle claims that chronic illness and physical pain often arise from a disconnection from the body. When you are identified with the mind, you are not in your body. This creates a split. By re-inhabiting your body, you can facilitate healing. Even if physical pain remains, it no longer becomes psychological suffering. You can be in pain without being in misery. Chapter 7. Portals into the Unmanifested. This is one of the more mystical chapters. Tolle describes the unmanifested, the formless, eternal source from which all creation arises. He offers several portals through which you can access this dimension. The portal of the body. We've already discussed this. The inner body is the first portal. The portal of silence. Tolle says that silence is a portal. In the world, noise and thought are forms. Silence is formless. By focusing on the silence between sounds, the gaps in conversation, the quiet between thoughts, you can touch the unmanifested. He advises that when you are in nature, listen not just to the bird song, but to the silence that holds the bird song. The portal of space. Just as silence holds sound, space holds objects. Your mind usually focuses on objects, the furniture, the walls, the trees. But if you shift your attention to the empty space around the objects, you touch the formless. This is why looking at the sky or the vast ocean can be so soothing. It reminds you of your own vastness beyond form. The portal of deep stillness. Ultimately, these portals lead to the same place, a state of deep, inner stillness where you are not concerned with the content of your life, but with the consciousness that perceives it. Chapter 8. Enlightened Relationships. In this chapter, Tolle applies his teachings to the area where most of us suffer the most: relationships. The ego in relationships. He argues that most relationships are not based on love, but on an ego bond. Two people come together to meet each other's needs, to feel whole, to avoid loneliness, to feel validated. This isn't love, it's a codependent transaction. Inevitably, the partner fails to meet the need perfectly, and the relationship becomes a battlefield of blame, resentment, and manipulation. The two types of conflict. He distinguishes between the pain body of the individual and the collective pain body that forms in a relationship. When two people have unresolved pain, they trigger each other constantly. A simple disagreement can activate the pain body in both partners, leading to a cycle of drama and suffering. The way out. The solution isn't to find the right partner. It is to become present. If you can observe your own pain body when it arises in a relationship and observe your partner's pain body without reacting, you stop feeding the cycle. True love, Tolle says, is not a need. It is a state of being. When you are whole within yourself, you don't need a relationship to complete you. You share your wholeness with another. He also touches on the concept of letting go of a relationship. Sometimes, a relationship serves its purpose, and it's time to move on. The ego clings to the identity of being a spouse or partner. Presence allows you to accept the form that life takes, even if that form is dissolution. Chapter 9. Beyond Happiness and Unhappiness. This chapter tackles the nature of emotions. Tolle argues that happiness and unhappiness are two sides of the same coin. They are dependent on form and circumstances. The illusion of conditional happiness. If your happiness is dependent on things going well, then it is fragile. It will inevitably be shattered by loss, aging, or unforeseen circumstances. This is not true peace. True peace is unconditional. It is not the opposite of unhappiness. It is the space in which happiness and unhappiness occur. The peace that passeth understanding. Tolle references a biblical phrase. This peace is not an emotion, it is a state of consciousness. When you are rooted in the now, you can be in a situation of apparent unhappiness, loss, illness, without being unhappy. You feel the emotion fully, but you are not the emotion. You are the watcher. The art of allowing. He introduces the concept of allowing. Most of our suffering comes from non-acceptance of what is. We mentally argue with reality. He says, whatever the present moment contains, accept it as if you had chosen it. This is a radical practice. If you are stuck in traffic, instead of resisting, say, this is now. If you are in pain, accept it as a teacher. This doesn't mean you don't try to change things. It means you don't add mental suffering on top of the physical or situational reality. Chapter 10. The Meaning of Surrender. The final chapter is perhaps the most profound. Surrender is often misunderstood as weakness or defeat. Tolle redefines it. Surrender is inner acceptance. Surrender is the simple recognition that what is already here. Arguing with reality is a fight you will always lose. Surrender is the inner state of non-resistance. It doesn't mean you don't take action. In fact, when you surrender, your actions become far more powerful because they are not clouded by resistance. The three options. He returns to the three options for dealing with any situation. Remove yourself, change it, or accept it. The moment you accept a situation, you are free. Even if you choose to change it, you do so from a place of empowerment rather than victimhood. Surrender and transformation. Tolle tells stories of individuals who faced catastrophic situations, illness, imprisonment, loss, and through surrender, found a depth of peace they had never known. He explains that when you cannot change the situation, you are left with the challenge of changing yourself. Surrender dissolves the ego, and what remains is the light of consciousness. He ends with a powerful note. Surrender is not about giving up. It is about giving up the inner fight. It is the end of the illusion that you are separate from the whole. Key insights and takeaways. Now that we've walked through the structure of the book, let's distill the most potent, actionable insights that you can apply to your life starting today. Insight 1. The voice in your head is not you. This is the foundational insight. For most of us, we believe that we are our thoughts. Tolle's core teaching is that you are the awareness that witnesses the thoughts. The moment you notice that you are thinking, you are no longer trapped in the thinking. You have stepped into a higher dimension. Practice this daily. When you wake up, before you get out of bed, observe the first thought that comes. Just watch it. You'll begin to feel a gap between you and your mind. Insight 2. Your pain body wants drama. Have you ever noticed that sometimes, when things are going well, you feel a subtle pull to start an argument or to worry about something? That is the pain body. It is hungry for negativity. When you feel a sudden surge of anger, sadness, or defensiveness, don't act on it immediately. Instead, stop and say to yourself, this is the pain body. By naming it, you withdraw the energy it needs to feed on. Over time, you starve it. Insight 3. The future doesn't exist. Anxiety is the mind projecting itself into a future that doesn't exist. Tolle says that the only time you ever experience anything is now. If you are anxious about a meeting tomorrow, you are not actually experiencing tomorrow, you are experiencing a thought about tomorrow in the present moment. The remedy is to ask, what is my problem right now? The answer is almost always that you are fine in this moment. The future will arrive as the now. You will handle it then. Insight 4. Stop waiting to live. This is a brutal insight, but a liberating one. If you are waiting for the weekend, the vacation, the retirement, or the partner, you are not living your life. You are living a waiting state. The ego loves waiting because it keeps you focused on a future illusion. Drop waiting. Find the value in the activity you are doing right now. If you are washing dishes, wash dishes. Feel the water, the texture of the plate. Make the act itself the focus, not the completion of the act. Insight 5. Use your senses to anchor. One of the simplest techniques in the book is using your senses to enter the now. When you feel overwhelmed by thought, look around you. Notice the play of light on a wall. Listen to the distant sound of traffic. Feel the fabric of your clothes. By immersing yourself in sensory perception, without labeling or judging what you perceive, you bring your consciousness out of the mind and into the present moment. Insight 6. Allow things to be. The primary source of suffering is non-acceptance. You are arguing with reality. If it is raining, you are thinking, it shouldn't be raining. If someone is rude, you are thinking, they shouldn't be like that. This inner resistance creates friction. The practice of allowing means accepting the is-ness of the moment. It doesn't mean you condone bad behavior or inaction. It means you stop fighting the reality of what is, so you can act from a place of clarity and power. Insight 7. Relationships as spiritual practice. Instead of using your partner to make you happy, use your relationship as a mirror. When your partner triggers you, don't blame them. That trigger is pointing to unhealed pain within you. If you can use your relationship to become more aware of your own ego and pain body, the relationship becomes a sacred path. True intimacy is not two egos merging, it is two presences meeting. Conclusion. We have journeyed through the core of the power of now. We've explored the tyranny of the mind, the mechanism of the pain body, and the radical liberation of presence. We've walked through the portals of the inner body, silence and surrender, and we've distilled the insights that can transform a life of anxiety into a life of peace. So, what is the power of now ultimately about? It is about waking up from a dream. For most of human history, we have been living in a dream. The dream of the ego, the dream of time, the dream of separation. In this dream, we suffer. We chase after things that cannot fulfill us. We run from pain that we cannot outrun. We build identities out of our wounds and then defend those identities with our lives. Eckhart Tolle comes along and says, simply, wake up. The alarm clock is the present moment. The moment you give your full attention to the now, the dream dissolves. You see that the past is a memory, the future a fantasy, and that all there ever is this. This breath, this sensation, this awareness. Reading this book is not like reading a novel or a typical self-help guide. It is an initiation. Many people report that simply reading the words on the page shifts their consciousness. The book itself is an energy field. If you approach it with openness, it can serve as a catalyst for your own awakening. But here is the catch, and it's an important one. Knowledge is not enough. You can understand the concepts intellectually, you can define ego and presence perfectly. But if you don't practice, nothing changes. The Power of Now is not a book to be read and shelved. It is a book to be lived. Tolle suggests that you keep the book by your bedside. Read a few pages a day. Let the words seep in. Practice the exercises. When you find yourself lost in anxiety or regret, come back to the simple question, what time is it? The answer, always, is now. As we close this summary for Audiobook Insights, I want to leave you with a final thought from Eckhart Tolle himself. He says, The quality of your consciousness at this moment is what shapes the future which you can only experience as the now. You are not at the mercy of your past. You are not a victim of your circumstances. You are the eternal presence that watches it all. And in that watching, you are free. If you found value in this summary, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Audiobook Insights. We are dedicated to bringing you the deepest wisdom from the world's most transformative books, distilled for your journey. And if you feel called, pick up a copy of The Power of Now. Read it slowly. Let it work on you. It might just change your life. Until next time, stay present.